As Megan said, I'm Tobin Smale with LANDFIRE Fuels. They wanted us to talk a little bit today about capable fuels because it's something new that we did for remap 2016. Really the big difference between those two products, what we did from LANDFIRE National to LANDFIRE 2014 was, I guess, the difference between capable fuel and what we did previously between LANDFIRE National and LANDFIRE 2014 is that we made capable fuel. And the difference between those two is just two things, really, at a high level. It's one in name, so that it'll differentiate between what we're doing from 2016 on and then what was previously mapped in National to 2014. So that's the big thing. And the naming of capable was just we needed a different name to differentiate the two so that when people see it, they go to the website, look it up, try to figure out what's the difference between these two. Why is there a capable now? What does it mean? What's it, how's it helpful to us? Let me get my screen up here. Well, actually, and the second thing that I was going to tell you about is the time since disturbance, which this chart should help out with. I'm going to show it here. Hopefully this works. And make sure that's nothing important. There we go. And share. Let's see here. Excel. And I just put together some really quick and dirty charts here. Can we see the charts okay? Because now I can't see everyone else. All I can see is my chart. Yeah? Okay. Perfect. So the second thing I was going to tell you, not only in name, but in time since disturbance. So hopefully these little charts will kind of help describe things a little bit. So in LANDFIRE National through 2014, we described our products as the last year that there was disturbance. So if it was 2014, that's where the, that's up to the number of disturbance or the year of disturbances that we have. So that would have been 2014. Now, if we did that for LANDFIRE remap 2016, the fuel products would be 2016. Came up with an idea of, okay, I better get that out of the way. Came up with an idea of making capable fuels. What that means is, if we look at this non-disturbed section here, and just look at this top chart. So for LANDFIRE 2016, I put some arbitrary years in there, but say we started in 2005, right? So you go all the way up through 2016, all non-disturbed. And then that would make it so the data is capable of use in 2017. But since we're now in year 2020, we'd like to tack on these extra 3 years. Now, the difference is in non-disturbed areas, these 3 years do not have any disturbance in them. So you could, in your non-disturbed areas, potentially still have disturbances in 2017, 18, and 19. And if that makes sense, then we can move on here. So now when we start to look at disturbances, and like I said, the big difference in capable fuel between National and 14 is time since disturbance. How long has it been since the disturbances occurred? So if we were looking at making this a LANDFIRE remap product for 2016 like we did in 14, all your disturbances, which are these colored sections here, here's the first year after disturbance would be 16. 2 to 5 years after would be 12 through 15. 6 to 10 years would be 2007 through 2011. And then before that would be non-disturbed because we only do a 10-year window of disturbance. So that would be good for year 2017, right? But since we're in 2020, everyone that got data from LANDFIRE in National through 2014, say, in previous LANDFIRE versions, would have to take that data, update it so that it would be usable for 2020. So we decided to do some of those updates so that it's capable of use in 2020. What that means is we changed the time since disturbances, okay, in this little window here. So if you had a disturbance in 2016, right, 2016 in a capable LANDFIRE product for 2020 would actually be in this 2 to 5 years since disturbance. Now, the reason the time since disturbance is important is because that's how we assign our fuels. So if we change the time since disturbance to reflect an effective year to be used in 2020, then we can assign surface fuel models and canopy fuel based on that. And I'm going through these kind of quickly, so hopefully there'll be some questions. Okay, this third piece is one of the rule sets that we use to assign surface fuels. Okay, let me bring that down just a little bit so you can still see the above chart here. And this is for Intermountain Basins, Juniper Savanna, EBT 2115. The first rule says that if you're a tree between 10% and 19%, and basically any height in this type of vegetation, it just goes from 0 to 25 meters. The non-disturbed fuel model in that open situation, 10 to 19%, is a GR2. Okay. Then when we talked with specialists across the United States and said, okay, if you were a GR2 then, but you had a fire in the 2 to 5 year range, low severity, this column here, you would still be a 102. And that's what they said, yes. You'd still be a 102. If it was in the 6 to 10 year range, low severity, it'd still be a 102 because the severity is low. We look at moderate, 102, and moderate 102. And mainly that's because there's just a lot of grass in that 10 to 19% tree cover. And then when you get to high severity, they said it would come back in 2 to 5 years as a 102. But if you notice here, they said it would come back as a GS1 in the 6 to 10 year range. And I believe that's mainly because you're getting more shrubs coming back to that high severity situation. Okay, and then if we look down the other fuel models, if you started with a GS2 in this cover range, then you can see how the fuel models would change under this situation. And then the third is 30 to 69%. Here's your starting fuel model and how they would change low, moderate, and high in 2 to 5 years, low, moderate, and high severity in 6 to 10 years. Okay, now this is important, and it would have been better if I chose a rule that, or a set of rules that fell within, that was one of the EBTs for this picture, this fire I want to show you. But this is the Dose fire. It's just a little bit west of Prescott, Arizona, and it occurred in 2013. So most of that, if we had called this a 2016 fuel and not changed the time since disturbances, it would have been in that 2 to 5 year range. So as you can see, there's more benign fuel models in here. This is an SH1. It's hard to see the colors, but since the bubbles are there, it'll make sense. And TL1, which is pretty benign. GS1, it's a faster moving grass shrub. Not like a grass shrub 2, but it's a little faster moving. And then a GR1, which is a slow moving grass as well. And this TL1 is a slow moving timber litter model. SH1, slow moving shrub model. But if we change those times since disturbance, make it capable for 2020, now you can use that and look at this landscape now. You have increased your fire behavior in basically just changing a surface fuel model that reflects the time since the disturbance to something that's faster. So this GS2, it was an SH1 up here. It became a GS2, which is quite a bit faster. And the TL1, which is pretty slow, became quite a bit faster with the GS1. GS1 over on this side here became GR2, and then a GR1 down in this southern portion becomes a GS2. So
can you humor me and tell me again what the SH, TL, GS, what those stand for again?
Yeah. So SH is a shrub. It's just the first two initials. So SH1. If I had a surface fuel model publication here, you could look that up, or I can show it on my screen. But these are from the Scott and Bergen surface fuel, or 40 surface fuel models. TL is timber litter. GS is grass shrub. GR is grass. And then we've already gone over those other two as well.
So
But
when you say fast, you mean like fast spreading, right? Rate of spread.
yep, faster rate of spread, in some cases a higher flame length. In most of these cases, that's that it does increase fire behavior, meaning rate of spread and flame length. Okay. Let me go back to that other piece here. And then, we could go into, what we do for vegetation and things like that, but maybe this is where we'd want to start taking a few questions. Is that?
I think that's a good idea, Tobin.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just kind of see if there's if this kind of piqued anybody's question.
Yeah.
Curiosities.
Unshare here. Uh-oh.
Uh-oh.
I got OneNote coming up here.
Who even knows what OneNote is anyways?
Yeah. Right.
But yeah, this office hours is designed for you all to have access to people to ask questions. So as I said in the beginning, we have fuels experts like on the call. So please don't be shy if anything needs clarification, or if you want to ask a specific question about your work.
So this is Zeke, Robert Zeke calling, and I'm interested in actually knowing whether or not those tables are available for reference.
Oh yeah, that's a good question. So that table that I made, it is. Everyone hear me all right? You got a little feedback there. I kind of simplified it from the rules from LFTFC, and also we have some Excel spreadsheets as well. You can, I think if you email the help desk to ask for I think they're called the surface transition fuel models, they should be able to link those up with us, and if they give you okay, we can just hand them off to you. Otherwise, there's also, I don't know if I can show it, on the website, on landfire.gov, there is an access database with all the LFTFC, Landfire Total Field Change Tool rule sets, and they're also set up in a manner like that.
So I looked on the website, and I think I've seen the access database, but I don't think that it's posted yet for the remap.
Oh, no, you are correct. Yeah, it's not posted yet for remap. It is in, so that if you're comfortable with access, though, you can download the newest version of LFTFC, and in that zip, there will be access database, and it's all broken out by zone, but you'd have to look through it probably with the toolbar, or if you know the Landfire codes pretty well, you could look in the access database. Once we're done with Alaska, then the newest version of the overall database, I guess it's called Master Disturbance Database, I think, that should be posted then. So that would be probably August, I think.
All right, but Zeke, give me something. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Yeah, Zeke, those spreadsheets that we originally started with, what we did was we explained the time since disturbance, and we built spreadsheets with all the EVTs. This was right when we did Landfire Refresh 2008, and we were just starting to incorporate disturbance into the data. So we built these massive spreadsheets and showed the fuel rules and sent them out to specialists in each geo area around the country. And then we did little seminars like this to get their reaction to how the fuel model had changed over time after certain severities of disturbance and different types of disturbance. And they would say, they would give their input as to how the fuels would change, not the vegetation, but how the fuels would change in terms of surface fuel model. So those spreadsheets are available. They're a little wonky to get and to work with. The database is a much easier route to go, and also we have to usually get approval from the BLG members before we can pass along those spreadsheets. But those are the original inputs from everybody as far as fuel model transitions go. One of the reasons why we thought of doing capable fuels is because the way we were doing things in the previous LANDFIRE versions, those transitions weren't happening the way the specialists wanted them to, because we were getting veg that would change EVT due to disturbance type and disturbance severity, and it would change structure in terms of cover and height. It would also change life forms as well. So we didn't know at the time, or we didn't know from the vegetation that we were receiving that was a disturbed pixel, and it was this type of vegetation previous to the disturbance. So the transition and the trajectory of that fuel model transition that we had received from the specialist wasn't being followed, because the structure was changing it to some other fuel model rather than the trajectory that they had given us.
Okay.
So just so you have an idea where that all comes from and what's available, we have been able to give those original spreadsheets out, but we do have to get permission to do that.
No, I downloaded the total fuel change, but it doesn't work with ArcMap 10.8. And so, but I do have that access database. I'll poke into that and see what I can do with it. Thanks.
Well, that's good information to know it's not working with 10.8. Tobin, you're still working in 10.7, right?
Yeah, I could get it updated. Part of the issue I run into with updating and keeping up with ARC is that we're only, I think our highest version we have is 10.7 or Pro. And what I have on my machine is 10.7, so I can only program up to that date. But if I get updated, I will definitely get a name going.
It'd be great if anybody has another question. If you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about your work, just like a sentence. I should have asked that at the beginning, but it's always fun to see how people are using LANDFIRE data, and yeah, that matters to us for sure.
I have a question, Megan, but I think most people know who I am, so I'm not going to bother with that. Tobin, you mentioned several times in there about disturbance type. Can you tell us what disturbance type means to you in this rule setting framework?
Yeah, sure. Let me share my screen again here. That way, this might be helpful. I'm sharing my screen, but I can't get to. I'm going to move that out of the way. There we go. Here we go. So I did mention disturbance type, and what Jim's talking about here, which is easier to look at for these rules. So here's just two pieces of disturbance type, time sense disturbance, and severity of the fuel, or severity of the disturbance. So the different types are fire, mechanical add, like say mastication, things like that, where it would add fuel to the ground but rearrange it basically. So you'd have to adjust your fuel model based on that. Mechanical remove, like timber harvest of some sort, a field treatment, whatever. Maybe it's a thinning from below, or whatever's been harvested from, shouldn't say harvest, whatever's been taken from facts or I can't remember what the other system is, national system.
NIF cores?
Yeah, there you go. Yep. Let's see, so that was mechanical remove, and then there's insect and disease, which is pretty limited. We're trying to include more insect and disease, but it's mostly limited to defoliators, things like that in tree situations. Blowdown is another one, and I think that's it. And then we have another category called mechanical unknown, but that gets into a little bit deeper talk as to what those are. But when they remotely detect some of these disturbances that we don't have events for, from say NIF cores or FACS, it gets put in these categories of unknown, and a lot of those tend to be mechanical remove. So in the LANDFIRE total field change tool, we call them mechanical unknown. And then of each of those fire types, you can have 3 severities: low, moderate, and high, and then you can also have 3 time since disturbance, 0 to 1 years, as you can see here, and then 2 to 5 years, and 6 to 10, and then a non-disturbed situation, which is what the majority of the pixels fall in.
Yeah, I mean, it might be good to reiterate what Don put in the chat, where Tobin has those the gray years there in the bottom, in the capable fuels. So there aren't actually any disturbances recorded in those years, right? So yeah, just something to keep in mind. But it still is you know, the change in the fuels is reflected for the disturbances up to 2016.
Please feel free, if anybody needs clarification, don't feel shy. Ask away.
So Randy Swati here. I was wondering if I'm thinking of your work, Inga, especially like on the East Coast, but I was wondering, you know, I'm an ecologist, not a fire person. I wondered if you could, like, I feel like I want to ask you to tell a story. Like, I remember you showed some slides about the Pine Barrens in New Jersey, Inga, and how the data changed, but I don't know if you, in those slides, introduced the capable fuels idea. I wonder if you could put in a little bit of ecological context for me in terms of capable fuels versus normal fuels, and what that might mean for someone, say, you know, on the Wayne National Forest dealing with the ecosystems there.
Well, I think, you know, it really relates to the fire behavior models, and I think if you're going out and you have an area that was disturbed, you know, 6 years ago, you want the fuels to reflect how that regrowth has happened, right? When you're running that fire behavior model, if you don't have it essentially changing for that whole time, then you're going to run into something that's not actually what's on the ground, you know. And so that's, I think, really what they're trying to address with the capable fuels is saying, you know, well, the fuels have changed since that disturbance, and they've changed to now, not to 4 years ago, right?
Okay, great. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, good point there. Because that's one of the things that, say, like the Don Helmbrechts and the Joe Scotts and those people that are updating fuel for people, that's one of the things they do, or that they still do. But we kind of took cue from them to do as much as we could to get it ready for them to update fuel, or other people to just use them as is without having to do as many updates.
You know, Randy,
Great.
another thing that, you know, well, not only ecologically, but also from a fire prevention point of view, or a fire risk point of view, you can look at those fuel model transitions that these local experts have given us, and you can tell in the first time step in many of the situations, the fuel potential and the fire potential has dropped off in the first 5 years. But in that second 5 years, you might see that it's increased. And so, you know, you can think about what kind of treatment you might want to apply to that area for protective reasons or for ecologic reasons, with what might come back in that 6 to 10 year period, according to these experts. So it's, you know, it's a fairly succinct way to look at different landscapes and get an idea of what might happen, if, you know, what effects you might be having.
So then the capable fuels that we're seeing up there for download are the 2019 and the 2020 sort of file versions. Is that correct then?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's correct. So it doesn't include 2019 limited yet. 2019 limited should be coming out, we're hoping, by the end of June, which would be a 2021 capable fuel.
Okay. So this is Zeke again. I've got a question about this notion that the capable fuels is, you know, sort of reconciling that there's, you know, succession, there's, restoration going on. Is the vegetation also being changed at the same time?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So we address the succession through the surface fuel models, but we don't actually change the vegetation for disturbances, so that we always have a starting point to move forward from. So if, you know, I don't have that chart in front of me, but I guess the easiest way to answer this is, for the limited update, which is 2019, we're doing just fuels. For I guess it's going to be the 2022 update, and these dates can be, or these years can be a little confusing because that's up to the number or the year of disturbance that's in them. It's not actually the current year. So the newest one coming out is the 2019 limited, and that'll be just for fuels. There won't be any vegetation updates.
So that's not quite right.
Yeah, not quite.
We are transitioning vegetation in disturbed areas. That's the plan for now.
Right.
Oh, okay.
With ST-SIM.
But not for fuel.
It's in the same disturbed areas, I would assume.
Right. So the vegetation product would be separate, and that will have disturbances in the vegetation. The fuel products treat disturbances separately. Like I showed you, they have transitions for the fuel models and for canopy fuel. But to get to that point, we use different vegetation. But yes, there will be other vegetation available that does have changes in disturbed areas. That's correct.
And essentially, okay. Just to follow up, so that 10-year, you are not applying those rules to change vegetation. You're applying them to the vegetation that was at the beginning of that 10-year disturbance period.
Yeah, that's correct. And that kind of gets at the point that Charlie had about how we were almost incorrectly applying our surface fuel transitions at the beginning of LANDFIRE through National to 14. So now that we use a pre-disturbance vegetation for fuel, just for fuel, that gives us a starting point. And then we can apply the non-disturbed fuel model for non-disturbed areas. And then from that non-disturbed fuel model, if there is a disturbance in those areas, then we can add or change based on those rule sets. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
really are, I mean, this is a clarification. You're going from fuel model to fuel model, right? Whatever was there before the disturbance, whatever fuel model was assigned, and then based on the type, the severity, and how long it's been since it happened, you're transitioning to another fuel model. So in that case, you know, the original fuel model, yes, was based on vegetation and structure. But after that, you know, the pre-disturbance fuel model was assigned, and then it's just being transitioned to another fuel model. So.
Yep. For capable fuel, like I said, the biggest difference for capable fuel is we're adjusting that time since disturbance and then applying the appropriate surface fuel model and canopy fuel for that.
All right, so the ecologist here with another question, and hopefully it's useful to other people. Could you describe the capable versus limited for me within the fuels context?
Sure. Capable versus limited. So limited, so when we say 2019 limited, that means that we have disturbances in there up to 2019. Not past 2019. So we don't have 20 or 21 in there. And when we produce capable, we'll say it's capable of use in 2021 for the effective year 2021, but it still will not have disturbances for that year of 2020. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm kind of building this matrix in my head of the disturbance, the fuel, the time. Yeah, so I think I'm getting it. So thanks a lot for your patience on that.
No, that's a big question we get, because the way we list our updates, or we have been listing our updates, is, you know, whatever that year is, that's the year that we have disturbances up to. So we came up with capable, making it a completely separate naming convention so that people know that it's capable for that year that they're using it, but it still may not have those disturbances right up to the capable year.
Jim, I think we're talking about versioning next month, right? Okay.
Yes, we'll be talking about versions next month. Yes.
All right. So
comparison. Yeah.
I mean, more questions are fine on that, but just if there's further clarification needed, we'll be talking about that in our next office hours.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree though, Randy. It's a constant like matrix of time and dates moving around for sure.
Yeah, and a fourth dimension somewhere.
And just say that this confusion is created by the program's desire to make the products more useful. You know, I mean, it's, you know, if we did the same thing over and over again every year, our lives would be easier, but we think we're improving the usefulness of the product suite. So during this transition from periodic 2-year updates to annual updates, there's going to be a little confusion. But we hope to someday to get down to a regular pattern to where it won't be as confusing, because we won't be changing it from version to version, what's included and what's not included. And so I understand it is confusing, but understand we hope it's for a good purpose and that it does make the products more useful to you over time. And I had a question, but if there's questions from other people, I'd like to not take up the time, but I do have a question of Charlie and Tobin.
And we still have 20 minutes, so I'd love to hear from anybody who's got a fuels questions or something else. Feel free to unmute yourself and tell us what you're doing with LANDFIRE data or what's tripping you up.
While they're thinking, I will ask my question, but you know, feel free to cut it short. Charlie and Tobin, you know, being a person that's always been interested in the usability of data sets, what have you got feedback from people about capable fuels or fuels in general, or have you done analyses that sort of help you understand how good they work in real situations, like on real fires or something like that? Has that sort of something that you've looked at?
We've gotten feedback from a lot of people that are doing the risk assessment type of work. Joe Scott's group in particular, they've been able to, you know, piggyback on the capable fields idea to help them so that they don't have to input 2 or 3 years of disturbance and then transition to field models themselves, because it's already on the shelf for them. So we've gotten that kind of input back from people. Tobin, you got any other instances?
I was just trying to think of, you know, if we had anything in our Farsight runs that we did.
Yep. Yeah, that definitely shows a market difference, because when you transition ahead, those disturbances that are over that 5-year mark or into the 6 to 10-year-old mark, you get a whole different variety of field models. Makes a huge difference. So those disturbances, that historic disturbances that we model to check our data with, definitely point to the fact that the capable fields idea is viable, very viable.
Since Don's on the call, Don, have you seen the same thing from the work that you've been doing? Sorry, Don Helmbrecht, I called on you out of turn there.
Hey, no problem, Jim. Yeah, I mean, I appreciate that it's one less geoprocessing step that we need to do when we grab the capable fuels off the shelf. We always used to have to mess with time since disturbance, which was a bit of a process, and now that's handled for us. So that's pretty nice. And it, you know, you still need to update your field disturbance layer for any disturbances that weren't in there.
Right.
But that's a much simpler process, and then you can put that into the LANDFIRE Total Field Change tool and press go and get your output layers more efficiently. So yeah, it's definitely a help.
Well, and the goal of the program is to try to, at some point, include disturbances from the previous year. We're not there yet, but that is the goal. So you would have even less disturbances that you would have to include. They'd have to be pretty recent. That's the goal. That's where we're headed, we hope.
Yeah, it's sort of like the capable fuel. It was a step in that direction. Like you couldn't give us the whole, you know, disturbances through last year yet. So, but you could help out, get partway there.
Yeah, I
Okay.
mean, part of it is, you know, we don't receive those perimeters until December, you know, and so it's going to really condense that timeline. But we're headed in that direction, right? So the limited update's going to have like 4 years of disturbance. Then we're going to have 2 for the one after that. And so we're kind of trying to shorten that, that disturbance timeline to get to that point. But it would really only be, we would only have probably, you know, 7 months to process all that disturbance and then, you know, assign veg and fuels and all of that afterwards. So it's a challenge, but we're sort of trying to shorten that, you know, as we go.
Who's next?
Hey,
Mohammed.
hi. Yeah, this is Mohammed. Sorry, I've had some difficulties with my webcam recently. Yeah, Mohammed Alipur from UCLA, and working on a fuel mapping project. So my question is just to build on what Jim just said. is, has there been any kind of evaluation, like quantitative evaluation, in terms of how good this kind of approach is, if you compare it with like remapping for like a limited area? So think we're not doing this nationally, we're doing it for a limited area. If we do this kind of time disturbance approach, the capable approach that you just talked about, versus we just remap for that year, and there hasn't been any disturbance. I understand the fact that the disturbances the disturbances that have happened since the last remap aren't included, right? Just the time since disturbance is being shifted. But aside from any disturbance that happens, do we know, or do we have any quantitative evaluation of how good this shift in time since disturbance reflects the real situation in terms of fuels? Was that clear? Question?
Yeah. I'm putting it all together. That was a good one. So the only analysis that's been done is basically, I mean, it's with any fire behavior layers, is that it's compared to what actually happened on the ground, what fires have actually burned, and how well you can model those, say, through Farsight, FlamMap, any of those kind of things. We have done a few Farsight runs for each year and looked at those, and that helps us determine, you know, are we kind of in the right realm of things? Are we shifting these correctly? And we found problems, and we've made adjustments to those rule sets. Like we said earlier, from national to 2014, those were kind of being applied incorrectly, because what we would do is take the vegetation team would make adjustments to the disturbed areas, and so we get the adjusted vegetation. Now when you apply that rule across, now you're applying it, say, from, if you had a rule that said 30 to 69% is a timber litter model 9, right? But if you get the vegetation later, after it's been adjusted, now there might not be any trees there, so that would fall in a different rule that would apply a grass model instead. So that's kind of what we were doing from national to 2014, is we were putting these rules in, but we were following them incorrectly. So now if we look at the pre-disturbance vegetation, then we can follow that trajectory all the way through from what the specialists have said. So it's more correct in the terms of what the specialists have given us for input. Now, as far as what's actually on the ground, I think, you know, my best advice is just modeling and seeing how it actually applies or works with actual fires. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know of anything quantitative or a good approach to really get at the quantitative differences are, but it has been suggested that, you know, in the future we should be moving away from these rule sets and just using imagery alone to get us a better indication of what change has occurred and what type of fuels are there currently. And I think that was brought up when we were taking a look at the Alaska prototype this year for the regular remap. And we were going to take a look at the two different methods to see if we could see which one might work best, but time just kind of ran out on us, and we needed to get going on getting Alaska completed, so we just adopted the rule sets again. But, you know, I think, and we've been talking in and out about the future of LANDFIRE, I think that's kind of where we're headed for that with the annual approach.
Charlie and Tobin, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you did run data against real fires and make a report of that, right? Is that published on the LANDFIRE website somewhere?
I don't think it's on the website. I
Okay.
think early on in the remap process, we did an ongoing fire. We
Okay.
did the ranch fire in Northern California, which for a while was the largest fire in California history, but
Yeah.
it tracked the fire very well. And then
Okay.
when we completed CONUS and actually some of the Hawaii and the insular islands, we took some time and we did 5 evaluations, I think, in different geo areas around the country. And we've turned them in. I doubt
Okay.
whether they make the website or not, but
Okay.
at least we do check our work
Yeah.
with actual,
Yeah, I think there's somewhere, Mohammed. If you want those, we can try to look them up and provide. That's sort of a heuristic comparison of data and how it compared to the actual fire.
fires.
Right.
Yeah, yeah, and that doing that was part of the check, Randy, when we were in the Pinelands. We were looking at some of those fires and how the fuels worked on that. So, but yeah, there's like 4 or 5 of those where they modeled the actual fire to see how it compared to using our fuels and inputs. They're really good stuff.
Okay, thank you.
We've got about 10 minutes left, so I want to make sure that if there's any questions, we still have time to ask the experts. And if there's no questions, I think it'd be great to just hear from folks on the call. How are you using LANDFIRE data? I mean, that's a real curiosity of ours. We're always looking for a really cool application. So even if you don't have a question, I'd love to hear back from you. What were you going to say, Inga? Sorry, cut you off.
I was just going to follow up on what Charlie was saying. I mean, I think it's sort of a natural progression, right? So if you want to have annual releases of, what happened last year, you wouldn't need to advance the fuels anymore, right? So I think that is kind of our general trajectory. But it's, it's going to take a few releases to get there, right? So.
Yeah.
You're going to say, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I was going to say, that's a good point. I think surface fuel is one of those that's definitely surface fuel models, and assigning fire behavior based on surface fuel models is one of those difficult things to assign from above, right? But canopy fuels, there's quite a bit of research out there that people are looking at doing that more and more and more. But it is one surface fire behavior is difficult to assign because it's kind of different for each analyst. Some like to use different fuel models for different things, even though it doesn't reflect exactly what it was designed for. But they get the fire behavior that they want. But the canopy fuel, that's definitely got some merit to it, I think, that we're looking at down the road anyway.
I have another really quick question. Correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding was that the capable fuels are the best estimate probably for an area where you don't have or you haven't had disturbance, right, over the past couple of years. But if you have disturbance and you know that you have disturbance in your area, you wanna sort of update the last available. You should go off of 2016, I guess, right, and not the capable, and do the update yourself for your custom area and custom disturbance. Is that right?
So I think if I understand the question right, if you want to add, say, disturbances for 2017, 18, or 19,
yeah.
if we were capable 20, yeah, okay. you could just, the way we have it set up with capable, you could actually just dump those right on top, and it would be very close, because they would be, you would just assign them a time sense disturbance for whatever that year would be. So if it was 2019, it'd be a time sense disturbance 1, 18 would be a time sense disturbance 2, and 19 would be time sense disturbance 2, because there were 2 to 5 years within that time range. So you could dump those right on top. Now, if you started back in 2016, then you would have to transition all the fuel, all those disturbances forward, you know, like we used to have to do it. But now, since you only have 17, 18, and 19 to add in there, then you can just dump those right into your disturbance layer, adjust your time sense disturbance for those, and you should be good.
Makes sense. Thanks.
Yeah.
So Tobin, I apologize in advance for dropping this bomb with 5 minutes left, but maybe that's a good thing, because we can just quickly brush over and get out. But one of the things that I'd like to, or one of the sticking points that I tend to come across a lot is in the mechanical disturbances, and you and Charlie both know where I'm going with this, because we have this conversation all the time. But mechanical add in particular, I would like to maybe see that split out a little bit in the future, if that would be a possibility, because everything from yarding to piling of activity fuels to pruning to mastication to site prep gets thrown into that mechanical add category, because it generally gets classified as a LANDFIRE event type of other mechanical. And there's just a ton of variation in what those activities actually do to the surface fuels. So I'm wondering if if you guys have thought any more about that, and have some ideas on whether we could add another category that separates some of those things in our category or two, or if there's another way to go about it.
We have had a couple of frank conversations on that, as a matter of fact. And it's on our list of to-do things that we really need to review what our outlook is for mechanical add. I mean, there's a lot of situations. I mean, pre-commercial thinning is a big one in the West, because that's stuff that's just left on the ground, and it's tons of fuels, and we don't capture that well at all. So there's a lot of aspects to mechanical add that we need to review, and probably come up with a whole different outlook on exactly how that particular type of disturbance works, and possibly another grouping as well, or another class of disturbance. But it's going to take some time to think through that, and we'll probably make sure that everyone's involved in thinking through that with us. So keep that in mind.
Don, are those noted in NIF and facts, those different
That's
mechanical
what I was
types?
asking.
Because trying to locate them on imagery would be very difficult. So
Yeah,
hopefully,
you'd have to have them declared in advance somehow.
Yeah, they get pulled in from facts and NIF pores.
Okay.
And then, I mean, you're familiar with facts, and there's a bunch of activity codes and activities. Those get crosswalked to a LANDFIRE event type, and then that gets crosswalked to an FDIS type.
Right. Okay.
So, and there's just the one category is really, I think, the main sticking point is it's this other mechanical, because it's
we've lumped too much.
Broad, like Charlie was saying, it's way too broad to capture the full range of differences that we're seeing on the ground. So it'd be nice it's good to hear that that might be addressed more in the future versions.
Yeah, and like you said, we'd like to make it kind of a joint effort, So those that are looking at those things, Don, that we'd love to have meetings.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Yeah. The other thing too would be cumulative disturbance, and addressing that a little bit more, how disturbance on top of another affects the severity and what we call that.